Welcome to today's webcast presentation, Improving Your Processes with SAP HCM Adobe Form Technology. We're delighted to have you join us. My name is Damien Williams and I will be moderating the webcast today. The webcast is scheduled for 60 minutes. The presentation will last for approximately 45 minutes and we will leave about 15 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. Today's speakers are Tom Keebler and Tom Halliwell. Tom Keebler is Global Practice Leader for HR Function Effectiveness at Towers Perrin, the highly respected professional services organization that helps organizations improve performance through effective people, risk, and financial management. Tom has particular expertise in HR strategy, structure, function design, and technology. Tom Halliwell is Senior Solution Architect at ROC, the global SAP HCM specialist. He has over 14 years' experience designing and implementing SAP HCM solutions with a specific focus on usability. He is also the global lead for SAP HCM processes and forms. Welcome, Tom and Tom. A 15-minute question and answer session is planned at the end. If you would like to submit a text question during the webcast, please type the question in the Type Your Question area provided on the toolbar at the right-hand side of your screen. Your questions will not be viewable by other attendees. Technical questions will be addressed as soon as possible, and questions relating to the topic will be addressed, time permitting, during the question and answer session at the end of the webcast. The webcast is one of a series from ROC and Towers Perrin. They run on the last Thursday of every month. At the end of the webcast, you will be sent a link to a short survey comprising just 8 questions. We would really appreciate your feedback. It also includes suggestions for future webinars. Now, without any further delay, let's move on to today's presentation. Over to you, Tom, to set the scene.
So in great detail around information on HR benchmarking, service delivery models, shared services, outsourcing, and the like. And as you might imagine, a pretty strong focus around HR technology and the use of technology. And that's where we'll kind of focus our discussions today. On the next slide here, I chose one of the questions out of the survey deck just to give you a sense of just how top of mind self-service transactions are for HR right now. We have a series of questions that ask around self-service in very detailed levels around specific to SAP or PeopleSoft and the like, as well as very broad levels around HR business objectives, enterprise business objectives. This particular question asks our clients in the survey to tell us a little bit about what their primary HRMS objectives are. And you can see there that in the second and third place, rising right up to the top there, are respondents telling us that manager self-service and employee self-service are top of mind for them and their primary HRMS objectives. Paired with the #1 position there around streamlining business processes, which fits very much together here, this is just one example of how self-service is really top of mind. And no matter how we ask these questions throughout the survey, it's very clear that this year, more than any of the survey, self-service really is where HR is making its technology spending and its investment here. And so you might ask, as we see in the next page here, you might ask the question, well, why is that? And what are the benefits that HR is seeing from this? And I thought maybe we'd spend some time digging into this from both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective here. So the first slide here helps us understand a little bit around what clients that have already deployed self-service are reporting as far as the impact of self-service. Again, more from a little bit of a qualitative perspective here. You can see very nice results coming back as far as the impact of self-service on the timeliness of processing, as well as the accuracy of processing there, and both to be expected and very good news there. Perhaps not as expected by everybody down in the lower left corner there. Our clients are telling us not only are the transactions faster and more accurate, but in fact the transaction effectiveness is better. That the end users are actually understanding the process more, understanding what it is they need to do more, and actually having a better and more effective experience here. So some very good qualitative results here, and we'll dig into a little bit more of that coming on. On the next page as well, from a more quantitative and, if you will, almost economic perspective here, clients often ask us to tell them about the actual, economic benefits of pushing into self-service mode, often in tandem with a shared services implementation or a broader HR transformation effort here. So I thought we'd start by talking a little bit around the workload impact that clients that have deployed self-service have seen across their organization. This particular slide here that I'm going to choose here, and we'll go into some finer detail behind it, is focusing on manager self-service, and specifically manager self-service transactions in the area of HR and payroll transactions. And what we did is we surveyed our clients for some empirical results that hopefully would match the anecdotal and client experience that we have here around the impact of manager self-service on 4 specific roles in the organization. The impact on HR generalists, HR shared service centers, line managers and supervisors, and the administrative support of the line managers and supervisors here. And what you can see on this particular slide, if we focus on the first 2, those within the HR function, some very good results. 2/3 of the clients that are out there say that their HR generalists saw a workload reduction. 60% of them said our HR service center representatives saw workload reduction as a result of deploying manager self-service. Now, you might look at that and say, well, yeah, that's definitely what I would have expected to see out of this. And there's a lot of people out there that repeat the lore or the bit of legend that says that manager self-service is really nothing more than pushing HR's work onto line managers and supervisors. So that's what makes the bottom 2 rows here this very interesting. I think that the lore would say that you should see a giant increase in workload on the managers out there. I, as a consulting professional in this area, would have started, looking at this to say I actually would be content if you had MSS and there was no workload change. It was just a change from paper to online, but in the end, the managers were not adversely impacted. But what we're actually finding here, a pretty surprising story and a positive one here, is that 41% of the companies are actually saying that their line managers and supervisors' workload reduced as a result of MSS. So as a result of getting out of paper and filling out multiple forms and having to mail it in and have to wait for responses or have to get changes back and manually redact the data and send it back in, what they're actually telling us is that managers are actually better off in 41% of the cases here by virtue of having manager self-service. And again, we teased out that 4th role here just to find out whether or not, in fact, managers were doing nothing more than delegating it to their admin staff, and in fact that also is reflecting a positive story here, with almost half of the organizations saying that manager self-service has actually eased the workload burden on managers' support function as well. So a little bit of a kind of a myth busting here taking place here. Very, very good news on the HR function perspective here, and I would argue actually surprisingly good news as far as the impact of manager self-service on the managers and line supervisors themselves. So let me get a little bit more detail around this here on the next slide and give you kind of a little bit of the shades of gray behind this here and actually try to show you a little bit around the degree to which workload is reduced. This is a bit of a complicated slide, especially to be talking about in a webinar here, but what this does is it measures for us the actual amount of workload reduction here, and you'll see in the middle there that 0% bar that implies no extra work, no work reduced there. And then above that implies degrees of additional work from 0 to more than 50% more work as a result of MSS. And below that is workload reduction from 0 to more than 50% of the workload reduced as a result of MSS. And so you get a good sense here of the degree of actual workload reduction on the HR generalists and the specialists. And again, a lot of companies coming in the 0 to 10 and 10 to 20% range. Almost 1 in 10 companies down there at the very bottom reporting more than 50% workload reduction on the HR generalist as a result of MSS. So, some very good information. And as you think about building your business case, qualitative and in this case quantitative and economic, some very good data to help you try to figure out what the impact of self-service can be and thereby what can be the return on your investment in manager self-service tools. On the next slide here, similar kind of conversation or similar data points with regard to service centers and shared service personnel that are here, actually more positive results coming out here, even more of a trend towards the less work bottom half of this picture here. A slight uptick in the more work, in the very small degree of more work areas here, and that actually matches what we see in some cases, especially organizations that are not particularly thoughtful about how they go about putting out self-service. They actually can see an increase on the workload of the shared service center, call center folks there, that often results from the fact that they still are doing the day-to-day job that they had to do before because the MSS tool is not offloading that, and at the same time they're now actually supporting a tool, and often in kind of a help desk mode supporting that tool. So very good stories in lots of cases, a couple cautionary notes to see out there. On the next slide, similar graphics here around the actual impact on the supervisor and line manager. And you'll see there again what I would consider to be a surprisingly good story. Not a perfect story, but certainly surprising, I think, for a lot of people that might have come into this with a bit of a prejudice in the other direction. And likewise, some very good results also, and some very, very good results on the administrative support side as well. So, both numbers of companies reporting very good results, as well as the actual degrees of workload reduction taking place there, also showing quite positively. So on the next slide, this is all very good. It's helpful information. It's definitely helpful if you're trying to justify a business case or ROI case for you here. But I thought maybe it'd be worth spending a little bit of time to talk about what it is that the people who saw the very best results, the people who were down towards the bottom there of the greatest degree of workload reduction, the people who are seeing some of the best results with accuracy and timeliness, like what is it that they did? And what we did is we crawled through a lot of this data in the survey to try to figure out what are the real drivers here, where are the real correlations for the people that saw the best success. So we started by defining success. And the success here is a few things. Number one, the workload reduction pieces that we just saw across a myriad of HR domains, measurements of those who had the best increases in usability, those in the best increases of accuracy and timeliness of the transaction, those who had the best receptivity by half of line managers out there, and those who saw the best improvements in the effectiveness of the process. So we built all those into a bit of a success index, and then we're looking to try to find what it is that actually drove that success. And on the next slide, you'll see here that we started by looking at an element of the design. So that when you went about designing your self-service transaction and processes, what kinds of things did you do here around organizing the HR site, around building in consistency of the look and feel and the behavior of the site here? To what degree did you do usability testing before rolling out the site, and thereby, again, bring in a lot of the usability elements that are here? On the next slide, you'll see some further components of usability that we looked at here around to what extent did you use online data validation and editing capabilities that may be part or may not be part of your tool? To what extent did you maybe make use of delegation capabilities? To what extent did you make use of tools that make it just for a generally easier user experience, such as single sign-on between all the different aspects and transactions that are out there? So a big focus on what the clients in the survey did from or did not do from a design perspective. Lastly, we married that up on the next slide here with some information that took a look at what kinds of activities, in addition to design, did our clients in the survey do with regard to actually rolling this out. And since I'm a consultant, I'll have to use the word change management in at least once in every one of these conversations here. So we tried to measure that from a few different perspectives. One, what were the change management interventions that were used, and to what degree were they used? And then behind that, we tried to measure also to what were the most effective change management interventions that were used. What was it that actually drove the very best results here? And you can get a sense of both of these here. I won't try to walk you through them on this call. You can have them in the deck afterwards here. Some very good information about what it is that clients did, and excuse me, what it is that actually paid off the best. So on the next slide, you can see as we try to kind of tie this data together and bring this and sift through it to try to figure out what the drivers were and what the data were telling us, we actually ended up with finding a very strong correlation here between two different things. When we looked at those companies that had the best results, the best business results of rolling out self-service, they did two things. One was there were those that were the most thoughtful about choosing their transaction tool and designing the website that wrapped around it and designing the transaction experience such that it is as usable and user-friendly as possible. And they spent time thoughtfully planning for and rolling out change management during the deployment of those tools. Those that spent the time choosing and deploying a usable transaction and doing some change management work as it went out are highly correlated to those companies that saw the very best business results and economic results from self-service and rolling self-service out. So, those of us on this call, being that we're an SAP-oriented audience here, are actually quite fortunate to have a solution that SAP is offering us here, based very much in the Adobe Forms process here. We have the ability in a SAP environment like this to combine the power of an SAP transaction engine and all the capabilities it has with what is very familiar and very comfortable and very usable Adobe experience here, and melding those two together through this process. So with that, Tom, if I could ask you maybe to pick it up and actually bring some of that to life by showing us a little bit about what that actually looks like.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, thank you, Tom, for that excellent introduction to the questions of usability. I'm now going to attack things from a more SAP-oriented point of view. There's a brief overview of the various topics that I'm going to cover, but first off I'm going to introduce Adobe Forms as a concept, as a technology, because they're quite broadly used within SAP these days. And then talk specifically about the other tools from an HR perspective that allow us to flexibly model processes using Adobe tools. We'll look at some of the key features. I will do a short demonstration using a couple of different processes to try and highlight some of the key features and some of the leaps forward that SAP have made in terms of usability. And then we'll wind up with a bit of a description of what the technology is and some of the lessons that we've learned through implementing this for customers. So first off, a bit of background. Adobe Interactive Forms, or AIF, is the result of a strategic partnership between SAP and Adobe that's been there for a few years now, with the result that Adobe Forms have become SAP's preferred form technology. So previously SAP had experimented with various different programming and form technologies. They're now sort of settled with Adobe, and that brings to the table an awful lot of powerful generic capabilities. So I'll just run a few of those. So one is the aspect that these forms can be used online in an interactive way, but also, depending on the application that's being used, they can also be used offline. They represent a big step forward in terms of visual appearance, and they also mean that from a user perspective, when printing a form, what you've seen on the screen is what you're going to print, because ultimately it is a PDF document, it is an Adobe document. From a technical angle, it's a big step forward because it brings together both that visually appealing layout and also the data content, so the drop-down list, the logic, are very much embedded within the form itself. And what that means is that it translates data into and out of SAP rapidly and quite naturally as the processes flow, and it means that you can check and validate information as you go through the processes. Okay. Now there are various tools on top that also help, so things like digital signatures, spell checking, that sort of thing, which come with Adobe, which are very helpful. So how does that affect us from the perspective of SAP HR? Well, there are a number of areas where Adobe Forms have cropped up. They first really arrived with parts of Manager Self-Service, MSS, in an application called the Personnel Change Request. Now, PCRs are really generally quite relatively simplistic processes for changing data, administrative data, initiated by managers. So changing an employee's cost center or giving them an additional payment, that sort of thing. This technology really has been superseded in the latest versions of SAP by something called HCM Processes and Forms, or HCM P&F for short. And this really extends the idea of PCRs and adds an awful lot of new features which make it really useful and flexible for managing and modeling all sorts of HR specific processes. Another thing worth mentioning is that you may have come across Adobe Forms simply from a printing perspective. So if you think about things like online payslips and so on, whilst not interactive, these are another example of actually the same technology being used within SAP to deliver printable, visually rich results for printing. In terms of actually editing the form, there's something called Adobe Lifecycle Designer, which is the editor, which is now integrated into the SAP GUI, which means that from a developer perspective, you can visually model the layout of the forms and the content and the working of the forms within the SAP GUI, which is a handy feature. So what does HCM processes and forms deliver? Well, as I've said, it's a flexible process modeling tool, but because of its emphasis on usability, it heavily draws on Adobe Forms themselves. I'm just going to skip to the next slide to show you some of the advantages. So, the text that you see here in red represents steps forward from the previous PCR technology. So as a process modeling tool, it allows you to support complex workflows, and it has a large degree of standard integration. And what that means is if you take real-life processes, often there are a variety of different approval paths that need to be modeled, particularly in a global organization or one with various different business streams. So that's quite important. Another thing that forms can do is that they can be tailored according to the stage in the process at which you're at and the role of the person looking or editing the form. So what that means is that an employee initiating a form, or a manager approving a form, or an HR administrator doing a technical check could actually see different elements of the form. The fields that they see can be, can be mandatory or open for entry according to the role of the person doing it, which makes it quite usable. One of the things that goes with it that helps to map real-life processes is the ability to make electronic attachments to the process object. So the form is one thing, but actually having an object which has both the form, attachments, an auditable log of the process is also very, very useful. In terms of data update, SAP have moved forward from where they were with PCR. What that means is that, generally speaking, all of the updates to infotypes, whether they be PA, OM, or time management infotypes, can happen without you having to go into the GUI, without you having to do any kind of manual transaction. Those routines are automatic. A few other things just worth noting. The HCM P&F is integrated to all role types within the portal. So whether you're using ESS, whether you're using MSS, or whether you're in one of the administration functions, the launch iViews, the monitoring iViews are available and integrated with all of that as a standard, which is a handy feature. One of the latest things that HCM P&F has given us with Enhancement Pack 4 is the ability to launch these processes for multiple employees. So one of the strengths of a form-based process is obviously the control and the usability for handling one person at a time, but in a situation where you're going to make a similar change for a lot of people, it's handy to be able to do that in bulk, and that's what SAP have done in the latest Enhancement Pack, is to have some tools for launching multiple employee processes, which then go off and initiate a series of forms already pre-filled out for you. In terms of the user interface, we'll see this in a moment when I start the demonstration. But SAP have tried to maintain a common user interface for these forms throughout the use of P&F. So there will be the roadmap at the top of the page, which is a familiar feature out of most parts of HR self-service now. So it's a navigable roadmap. You click on different sections of it and you can take yourself through from end to end. Beneath that lie a message area where your familiar errors and warnings and so on will appear. There are some buttons for management of attachments. Then the bulk of the screen is, of course, the form data area, which of course you can navigate through and scroll through, edit the fields and so on. And at the bottom of the screen are a set of processing buttons that allow you to advance the process, perform an approval, perform some checking, that sort of thing. Briefly before we get into the demonstration, it's worth just highlighting some of the steps forward that this kind of technology can give us in terms of addressing business issues. Ones that it's worth focusing on are the time that gets wasted either correcting errors or checking paper forms where you have processes that are either not based online or are somewhat disjointed between different systems. Putting in place a form technology, because the form inherits and has access to the business logic of the SAP system, it can do all that validation for you as you go, which means that when the data finally ends up in the right place, you can be assured that it is consistent and it is not going to need to be sent back to the originator. Other points worth noting here, in terms of user satisfaction, this is not an area where SAP traditionally has been very strong, and that does cause issues in terms of acceptance of solutions and in terms of productivity, how long it takes people to do things. So it is a big step forward in terms of SAP self-service offerings to offer something that's easy, that's intuitive, gives, if you like, user satisfaction, and also as a spin-off from that, reduces the amount of time and effort that you need to invest in IT training around these applications. Okay. Just one more from this slide. You can read the others from the slide pack. It's worth thinking about some of the actual practical problems that come from processes that aren't timely. So often one of the drawbacks of manual processes or multi-system processes that aren't quite joined up is that from somebody realizing a change to be made to that actual change occurring can be a long time. So a good example is, say, an employee changing cost center. Most organizations don't want to take the risk of putting organizational management out at a decentralized level, so it takes a while for that request to finally get to, say, the payroll department or the person responsible for org management. And that can mean that you have retro calculations in payroll, it means you've got retro postings into finance. It just simply adds to the complexity of the data and the complexity of the situations if you have problems. So making those processes more slick, because the process can initiate and be done fully online and workflowed, is a very helpful step forward. Okay, just a brief description of the demonstration before I start the demo. I'm going to be focusing on two user roles, a line manager and an HR administrator. And the two scenarios that I'm going to be covering are, first off, a situation where one of the manager's employees has been sick and just returned from a sickness. That the manager will be going in, putting in the sick note and the doctor's note, and sending it off to HR, who will do some basic check on the documentation and the form before allowing the data update. That's a good example of a process where actually you could equally well imagine that being done by the employee rather than the manager, but just for the purposes of this demo, we're going to initiate it from the manager. And the second one is the situation of the manager needing to transfer one of his employees to a different post, to a different position within his area of responsibility, but at the same time, the employee is changing to a part-time work roster, so they've got impacts on their contract, on their payment, and so on. And we'll see how that passes to the HR administrator after some necessary approvals for the data update. So I'm just going to transition us now to the demo. Okay, so as I start this demonstration, where are we? Well, we are logged into an SAP portal. We are in the manager role, and we're looking at MSS, or Manager Self-Service. You can see various different screen areas. Down on the left, I have a series of different services or iViews that can be launched by the manager for people in his team. In the main window, you can see there are a number of iViews, but the key one that's open is the team calendar. And we'll refer back to this later on, because what we're going to do is actually put in a sickness record for one of these employees. Okay, so I will start by navigating down onto my services panel and select one of the HCM processes and forms to launch a process for one of these employees. And the employee I'm going to select is Paul Greaves. So it takes me into this roadmap screen where I can navigate through and select the employee. And from there to the next step, I have a list of processes that I can choose, and I will choose the process that is an illness process. The reason there's a list of processes is obviously you can define a number of these for your organization. They could be different according to the different managers who use the system. So once you've chosen the form that is to, or the process that's to be initiated, SAP will load up the Adobe form. So here we've got an Adobe form on the screen. In this particular instance, we've chosen a process where it can be initiated in a number of different ways. So in this instance, what we've said is that if the employee has gone sick and they haven't yet returned, you'll fill out section 1 of the form. If they've already returned and therefore you've got their return date, you'll fill out section 2. And if so, you'll need to give some for instance, say a doctor's note to go with that. So we'll continue on with editing this form. So we scroll down to section 2 of the form, and what we're going to do here is enter the start date of the illness, the end date of the illness, and various other fields on the screen. So in this instance, as I said, we imagine that the employee has actually come back to work. So I put in my dates there. You can see I get little calendar selectors. As I navigate and do a check of the form and attempt to send it, this is where the system's doing validation. So as well as field by field validation, it's validating the content, and it's telling me that actually I need to enter all of the fields in section 2. So I put in an illness description, and I also realized that actually I've forgotten to attach the doctor's note. So I move to the attachments navigation, select the document, which I guess typically would be a scanned image file, and attach that to this process. Having done that, I will then proceed to confirm in the form. There's a little checkbox which says I have done everything I need to do. I have attached the supporting evidence. I do a check and send. I get a next step, which is a send. And then I've completed the process. I get a confirmation screen. Now I'm going to navigate to the work overview, which is the universal work list. Okay, so imagine now that the manager has gone ahead and processed that sickness record, but also he has some other work in progress. So in this case, he has actually started the transfer process for the next employee, who is Eddie Lane. But because he got interrupted, he saved a draft copy of that form so that he could come back to it later on. So that's what we're going to look at now. So we launch the form. So it already has content in because, as I said, we're opening up a version that we saved in draft earlier on. Navigate through the form. You see we've got several sections. We have the employee is assigned to a new position. It has their new contract details in there and their new payment details in there. There are some sections that haven't been filled out around additional payments or further payments that might go with it. And what I'm going to do is scroll down to the work schedule area. Now this is an interesting example because here what we've done is we have tried to provide some information for the manager to explain what work schedule the employee is going to be on without necessarily them needing to understand what the work schedule codes are that are set up in the system. And one of the things that many people find in their own systems is that they may end up with an awful lot of work schedules and that are either named confusingly or aren't very interpretable to an occasional user. So here it's more attractive to use the form to elicit the right information from the initiator, and then we'll use a user who has more system expertise, like the HR administrator, to translate that into the right corresponding work schedule. So here, this employee is on a part-time shift. They're working 4 days a week, and we will, I think, just go in here and check the checkbox to say that they're a part-timer, and we submit those details. The system, once we again do the check, will do its own validation and will do error checking on the full content of the form. So here it's going to come back and give me some error messages because actually this person is a fixed-term contractor and I haven't said what the end date of their fixed-term contract is. So I will navigate to the contract part of the form, fill out an appropriate date, another error message which is just asking me really to confirm that I know I've attached any necessary documents to this form. And having completed that step, I can then proceed again to check the form. If all is well, I will get a send button, and once clicking on the send button, my process has been sent and I get the confirmation screen. Now I'm going to switch us from the manager to the HR administrator and log in as them and process some of those forms that we've sent. So here we navigate as the HR administrator. First off, we are coming into their work list, which again is their universal work list for the administrator. You can see if you look down their list of items, there's a lot of different processes that they're involved in. But the one that they've just received is actually the sickness, the illness process for Paul Greaves. So we will launch that item. And here we see the form. As we navigate down through it, we'll see that the form has the details filled out, as we saw from earlier on. We know that the attachment is there. We can launch the attachment. So obviously, depending on the file, in this case it's an image file, so it will just open an image viewer. It could be, say, a Word document or any kind of file. It will launch the appropriate application, provided that Windows knows how to execute the file type. So we can check that that looks like the appropriate details for this sickness incident. We scroll down, in this case, to section 3, which is where we offer our confirmation. We know that we've got the end date, we've got the documentation, so we are going to officially submit and close this application. And what this is doing is sending the form back into the SAP system, and all of the finalized data updates that until now have been simulated actually are executed in earnest, and the illness record is created. Now, as I come back into the inbox there, I have another item which is actually for my transfer that has appeared. And in this instance, that transfer form, we have sent it off to another manager who has done the approval whilst that was going on, and sorted out getting the contract signed and attached. So we've now got the form which has been approved, has come to the HR administrator for further processing, and it's got the necessary documentation attached to it as well. So if you scroll down, obviously the details are there. Those fields that we see as we scroll through are now read-only. We can see that the HR administrator can look at the work schedule details, so the details of that part-time schedule. And we can also see, as we scroll down, that we get to a section of the form that's been processed before, where basically, from an administration perspective, somebody has identified the right work schedule rule that goes with those work schedule details. What we did with this process, interestingly, is also offer the possibility, if during processing the administrator realizes that there is no appropriate choice, then actually they can initiate a different process for actually going to get a work schedule created within the system. So you start to realize how one process can trigger another to actually fully map what happens in reality. But anyway, we see here that the form has been validated, and it does have a work schedule associated with it, and that will have been pulled through automatically into the final section of this form, section 4. So there's the work schedule. If it wasn't right, I could, of course, override it from the drop-down, but I won't. I also fill out some other technical fields that the manager wouldn't have known how to do or wouldn't necessarily be interested in, but are necessary for the update. So I put in its capacity utilization. I confirm that there's no change to the absence quota. And if I wanted to, I could just hover over it, but I could launch the contract, the amended contract for the employee. So here we do check and send, which is successful, and there I get the confirmation screen because the data has been sent completely. Now just navigating back, a couple of quick things to just check that that data has been updated. Here I'm going to navigate into employee information. This is still within the HR administrator role, and I'm going to pick up my employee again and show that in this instance it has created the absence record from 7th of September to the 15th. You can see it there. So it's done its automatic update for me. And here, just switching back there quickly, go back into the manager view in MSS, back with my team calendar, and I can now see that big blue blob there against Paul Greaves for the right dates. That's the absence record that I've created. It's been automatically updated here. If I click on it, I can get the details shown below, so I can see the type of absence that it is, illness. And finally, just as confirmation, if I scroll down to the bottom, I can also see here some of the monitoring functionality. So here I can see my processes for illness and for intra that are completed, and I've got a new starter that's still in draft. Okay, so the manager, like the administrator, or in theory the employee, if you wanted to give them that access, can also monitor these processes as they go along, and they can drill in and see a full audit log of everything that has happened for that form. Okay, now I'm going to switch us to the slides. Bear with me a minute. Okay, so we switch back to the slides. Okay, just some follow-up information after the demonstration. So, if you're impressed by what you've seen, what would you need in your SAP system in order to support running HCM P&F? Well, first off, you need ECC6. The minimum actual level is Enhancement Pack 1, but to be honest, at that stage, this still wasn't really perfected. So minimum, we would say Enhancement Pack 2. If you want the latest functionality, which includes things like multiple or bulk launching for forms, and also updates to OM objects, so it means that you can do things like organizational management updates in a safe but decentralized way. So that's quite an appealing thing. That's available in Enhancement Pack 4. For full functionality, use SAP Portal, because that gives you the integration into ESS and MSS. In terms of licensing, the situation is that if you use the SAP Adobe forms that SAP provide you as samples, then you don't have to pay further licensing. However, the reality is that almost all customers find that those are rather simplistic, and if they want to map real-life processing, you need to customize the forms and the processes to suit your own requirements, in which case there is typically a licensing impact, so you need to speak to your account manager. Further was one final technical point, which is to realize that when you're running these processes, whilst in the background, when the data is updated, it will create normally an actions record and infotype updates. It isn't actually following the traditional PA40 style actions. So it means that things like dynamic actions and infogroups that you might already have set up in your system, you can't reuse them as such. You need to reconfigure them into the new framework if you want to continue to use them for Adobe Forms. Okay, just briefly then on the approach to implementing this kind of technology and the pitfalls to avoid. The whole idea here, and we've shown you 2 processes out of lots that are available in terms of samples and standards, but also there's no real limit to what processes you map with this. Now that's great, but it also means that your implementation has possibly become a little open-ended, and it needs to be more tightly controlled than perhaps other implementations of SAP HR components that you've done. It also means that the advantage of harmonizing things like approval paths for workflow and data update routines is significant, because you don't really want to be implementing multiple different variations for multiple different local requirements unless you need to. So it is worth focusing on that activity before you begin any technical activity. Just a caveat around just simply replicating paper forms with an electronic version. obviously you should sense check that you can make best use of an electronic process, and you don't want to replicate steps that are redundant or aren't very helpful in an electronic format. Technically speaking, whilst this technology has actually become a little bit more centralized around configuration and ABAP technology, it still does require quite a broad range of skills, so make sure you choose your consulting partner well, or if you do it internally, make sure that people are up to speed properly before you begin. And final point really about modeling of real processes, typically they are complex. If you really go for a situation of trying to take all the manual elements out of the loop, you need to know that can often be quite complex, and obviously you need to test everything that you're going to design as well as just implement it. And sometimes that's underestimated by people, the testing time for workflows and so on. In terms of getting started, ROC have a pre-packaged product, an accelerator here, which can be useful for getting started because, as I said, the SAP sample forms are a little bit simplistic. So we've got a pack of 9 forms, 2 of the processes you've looked at today, so the illness process and the internal promotion transfer process. But there's a range of other ones which we can deliver to you very swiftly if that's of interest. So now I'm going to pass over, that's the end of my slides. I'm going to hand over for questions, and hopefully I'm going to respond to some of the questions that people have posed during the webinar.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that detailed insight into Adobe technology. Just as part of the questions, we have had a few questions coming in through the presentation, so we'll just perhaps address some of those. Tom Keebler, if it's okay, to answer this one, you mentioned that the survey participants a heavy focus on deploying self-service. I just wonder whether you have a sense as to what types of self-service they're actually working on.
Sure, absolutely, and I'll answer that, I think, in probably kind of a two-part fashion. When you stand back and look at the last 5-6 years of the survey, which is where self-service has really become, most evident, you'll see a couple different things. Number one, you'll see employee self-service was leading manager self-service in most cases by a 2 to 3 year kind of margin. The second thing you'll see is that employee self-service started off with very basic kinds of transactions, oftentimes inquiry-based transactions, inquiry-only transactions, I should say, or very basic kinds of updates. And that took a while before it got into some of the more complex kind of employee self-service transactions that are out there. Manager self-service followed a very similar path, but was a couple years, as I mentioned, behind employee self-service, but made the jump into the complex transactions in a much faster fashion. So there was very much kind of a learning curve on the ESS side before people dipped their toes in the MSS waters, but the MSS learning curve was not nearly as daunting for our clients. When we look specifically in the area of SAP for the purposes of this audience here, and we look at the survey data about what clients are working on at this moment as far as deploying self-service capabilities within SAP, what they're looking at in 2009 as well as on the books in 2010, we're seeing actually a very strong focus on talent management area, and specifically in 3 different areas here. One on the module around objective setting and appraisals. 20% of the clients that are out there are working in that currently or working that into 2010, which is double the number that we had in place. Skills and qualifications catalogs, 27% of clients are actively underway on that one or doing it in 2010, which is more than double the number that already have it in place here. And a very surprising, I think to many people, jump in the plans around succession planning and bringing that to life. And for those that did not get a chance to tune into the last session, I know, Damien, that that's recorded out there, but that was a very good one, that to focus on succession planning. But the plan, our clients are telling us right now that only 3% of them actually have that in place right now, and the rest within their SAP module. 6% are actively doing it at this moment. 9% have it on their radar coming up in 2010. So the long-range radar there for us is telling us that that succession planning is on the horizon, which of course makes some sense If you think that people are working right now on some of the foundational pieces around skills and qualifications and objective setting and that kind of stuff that will be needed for it.
Okay, that's great, and that's a good point. We'll include the link to the last webcast recording when we send out the slides to this one. So thanks for that, Tom. Tom Halliwell, if I can just throw a question your way that has come in, and is it possible to view a completed form once the processing has completed?
Yes, it is. In fact, from there's a process browser effectively, which allows you to not only view the status or the current status of a form and a process, but also to navigate into that, see the details of each step of it, and look at the form as it goes through that process. So you can look, once the process has been completed, you can always go back and look at the finalized, fully filled out version of that form. Behind the scenes, the form data is actually all stored in a case management object, which is what allows us all of that capability. And it also means that from a reporting point of view, you're not having to go and report from, say, workflow tasks. You've actually got an area where you can run SAP queries or ad hoc queries because it's stored in a case management object, and you can view it at any stage of the process.
Okay, that's great. Tom Keebler, I've got a question. I think we had this at the last webcast we run, which is how do the participants get to see a copy of the full survey results or participate in the next one?
Okay, so a few different answers for you there. Number one, at the end of this call, Damien, I think you folks are sending out a survey there, and embedded in along with that, if you complete the survey, you'll have access to an executive summary from this year's Towers Perrin HR Service Delivery Survey, and that's fresh off the press, and we'll have some very good information for you on that. If you did not participate and are interested in seeing the complete results, we'd be happy to come out and share them with you. It's as simple as just sending me a quick email, and my email address is cycling through there on the screen right now, or you can embed that in your response to the survey about this webinar. Likewise, if you'd like to participate next year, we'd be more than happy to have anyone join us for this. There is no cost to participate. However, only the participants actually get a full copy of the results. But we'd be happy to have you join us. Again, no charge other than the time it takes to complete the survey. And again, just simply make a note of that as you respond to the survey about this webinar, or drop me an email, and we'll be happy to include you.
Thank you, Tom. Tom Halliwell, I got another one from you, which is, does this require keeping in sync the latest Adobe Reader version with SAP in regards to compatibility?
Yeah, so there are some dependencies. It's not necessarily just as simplistic as saying take the latest Adobe Reader version, because, as is a little bit usual with different software partners, often it's best not to take the newest version just as soon as it comes out. Now, all of this is quite well documented on SAPnet. There are some central note numbers which perhaps can provide that information when we make the slides available, which basically tell you what the support levels are. And typically, often there's more than one level of Adobe that's supported for Adobe Form functionality, but the reality of that picture is that you need to kind of keep abreast of the right central note on SAPnet, which will tell you about any compatibility issues and give you a kind of a ramp up about when things are going to change. So there is a dependency, but actually SAP are well aware of it, and then from my perspective, it's managed reasonably well in terms of that dependency. So you don't necessarily, if you want to try this out, you want to roll it out, it doesn't mean necessarily that you need the latest Adobe version, but you will need a relatively recent one.
Okay. Thank you. I think we've got time for one final question, Tom, so just if you can keep your answer brief on this one, and that's what happened to the attachment, and does that actually get stored anywhere?
Yeah, the attachment is attached to that case management object. So this is the clever bit behind the scenes, is the case management object which holds that information with it, holds the link to that information, and holds all the form content as well. So it's actually all linked to the same object. It uses some of the SAP Archive Link technology. It's the same technology that allows you to show photos and other attachments. So it's the same bit of SAP technology recycled.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, on that note, I'd like to thank today's speakers, Tom Keeble and Tom Halliwell. Appreciate your insights into this area. I'd also like to thank our listeners for participation in today's webcast. We hope you found the presentation informative and useful. Links to a recording of the webcast will be sent to everyone, and any questions submitted, and they keep coming in, any questions submitted that weren't addressed, we will be answering via email. So please just be patient with us on that. Following the webcast, an email will be sent to you with a link to a brief survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback. It does provide us with a great, a great view of the quality of your experience on viewing this. And in return for your time completing this short 8-question survey, we would like to offer you the Towers Perrin Executive Summary Survey results. And on that note, this concludes today's webcast presentation. Thank you and goodbye.